Okay, if you can turn in your Bibles, can you have that first slide up, Tom? That'd be great. To Daniel chapter 1. And we're going to look a little bit at who are you? It's like a football thing, isn't it? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? What is it that sets us apart? What is it that makes us who we are? We're going to have a little bit of talk this morning about identity and character and what it means to follow God. And we learn a lot in Daniel chapter 1 about 4 young men who are thrown into extraordinary circumstances against their will, and yet when they're put under pressure, good stuff comes out. And so if you're with me in chapter 1 of Daniel, we'll start reading. I'm going to read the whole chapter because there's some really entertaining names in here, and you want to see me struggle, that's fine. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. We're going to look a little bit at these characters and discover some principles for our own life and our own living. The first thing we're going to look at is the identity, the image issue. That everything is perfect. If you go back in that passage, you'll discover that there's a wonderful description there of Gareth and myself. I'll read it to you just in case you missed it, because you might have heard it and then thought, wow, that can't really be them. But listen to this. It's Gareth and me to a T. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing. Why is Sonia laughing? That's showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve. Isn't that great? Wouldn't it be great to be like that? Just perfect. What do we know about these four guys? We know that they had it all. They were brought up in a privileged environment. Life was brilliant for these four young men. They had no worries, and actually a lot of commentators will tell us that these were probably pre-teens, sort of 11, 12, maybe 13-year-olds. Throughout this passage, they're referred to as young, as being really without much experience. And yet there's a quality about them. We know that they're from nobility or royalty. They had a privileged life, and now that's been ripped away from them as they're enslaved. We know that they're, I've said, athletic here because they're without any physical defect, as you can tell. They're athletic. Today, some of the kids might call them fit, because they are too sexy for the passage of Scripture. These guys are handsome. They're good looking. They're the sort of guys that, ladies, you would want your daughters to be bringing home and saying, Mum, I've fallen in love. These are the guys. These are the cream. We know they're smart as well. Not only are they good looking and athletic, they're not dumb. I mean, they've got it all. They're not jocks, if you understand what I mean by that. They're not just, meat for the rugby field. They have an intellect. And actually, we're told that they knew that they're well informed. In other words, they understood what was going on around them. They knew they didn't live in some kind of vacuum. And then we're told they're qualified. In other words, all those qualities made them prime material for the king to say, I want them serving in my courts. I want them learning. I want them getting wisdom. I want them to be the ones who advise me. Because how his advisors looked, acted, was a reflection on him. When others would come into his courts and see him, he wanted the best of the best to surround him. Isn't it great? I'm sure we're all like them, really, aren't we? Without any physical defect, handsome, athletic, well-informed, knowledgeable. Oh, all right. But even if they were the best of the best, they were still viewed as trainees. We're told in this passage they had to be trained for 3 years. Why 3 years? Not because it was a school particularly, but because they didn't speak the language and they didn't understand the literature. So they were told, you've got 3 years to learn this. And after 3 years, they get presented to the king. And if they failed the test, we're not told this in the passage, but this is probably what would have happened if they failed the test before the king, as he quizzed them, as he examined them, as he looked at them, and that would have been a close examination. It wouldn't have, they would have had to strip before the king. He would have done a physical examination to look at them and all these sort of things. And if they failed that, they would have gone back into hard labor or even been killed. So life is not great for these four guys. All of a sudden, they've gone from the have-it-alls to the have-nothings. And for Daniel and companions, their image is really shattered because, without being too graphic, but I'm going to talk about this a little bit, 2 Kings tells us that when people were taken into captive in this way, they were castrated. And in fact, the NIV talks about the chief official that looks after them. Other versions of the Bible will talk about the eunuch, the chief eunuch. So not only are they ripped away from their homes, everything they know, their life of privilege, they lose their manhood. And this would have affected them in several ways. Spiritually, it would have affected them because being nobility and having a life of privilege, they would have seen themselves as those who would seed the next generation. They're at the top of the pile. We're talking about William and Harry, aren't we? That's the kind of modern day analogy. That's who we're talking about. Now, you might think that would be a good process for them to go through, but that's who we're talking about. It's the William and Harry of their day. They're dukes, they're earls, and yet they're now, all of a sudden, one of their purpose to reseed the next generation has gone. They've lost that. Spiritually, they would now be asking, what's our purpose? Emotionally, they will be deeply affected by that because it's a traumatic thing. And their identity as men would have been affected because they would no longer undergo the physical changes if they're prepubescent teens. Their voices would never break. See, physically, their voices would never break. They would lose, obviously, their normal and natural drives. But more than that, And I had to read up on this. Gareth will probably know all of this stuff, but some of the other things that would have happened to them is they would have grown taller than normal. They would have grown taller because the hormones released in puberty that actually gives growth spurt and then slows it down would have gone. So they would have just grown head and shoulders above everyone else. And so they wouldn't have needed to be identified by a close examination. People could tell that they're being castrated because they would be taller than most of the other men around. Physically, that would have changed them. Interestingly, if they hadn't lost their hair through male pattern baldness, if you're castrated before puberty, you never lose your hair. Now, if only some of us had known that a while ago. But that's the truth of it. They might lose their body hair, but they'll never actually lose their hair. So all of these things, and talking with an effeminate voice and yet being handsome, there was an attack on every area of their life. Everything had changed. They were robbed totally of their perfect image.